Today from the global lane, casting votes in the world's largest democracy. A BJP victory may lead to more danger for India's Christians.
It would not be a good picture for Christians in India. We would expect to see that persecution continue.
Ivy League antisemitism, a prelude to war.
We're in World War III right now. It's cultural warfare. How do you fight each other, not with bullets and guns, but with words?
President Biden makes radical changes to Title IX rules.
Allowing men and women's sports is no longer a Title IX violation. Same with restrooms and locker rooms. And it creates a huge problem for everyone. It's a massive step back for due process and for the rights of women.
Throw away the kibbles and kitty litter. Students are furious over furies in Utah.
We the people of the animals.
And it's all right here on the global lane. Hindu nationalism rising? A first round of voting has ended in the world's largest democracy amid tight security at polls in one state where violence erupted. Nearly 900 million voters are electing members of the lower house of India's parliament during staggered elections through June 1st. What might the BJP party holding on to power mean for Christians in India? Well, joining us to share his thoughts is Open Doors U.S. CEO Ryan Brown. Ryan, India ranks number 11 on your annual World Watch list of persecuting countries. So what is life like for the 71 million Christians there?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and just share a little bit about what's going on there. Life for Christians in India, that Hindu nationalism that you spoke of continues to rise. And the passage of anti-conversion laws has made it very, very difficult for Christians and specifically Christian pastors to continue to work and to minister in the area. They face increasing opposition as that BJP party has taken increasing control over recent years with seeing great success over the last two election cycles. The rights of Christians have continued to come under fire. And things like those anti-conversion laws are being used to, while on the books in paper, it would, those anti-conversion laws would seem to be a noble thing, would seem to protect the rights of religious minorities by preventing people from forced conversion. But in actuality, those are being utilized to leverage baseless accusations against pastors, pastors being imprisoned just with the accusation, pastors being threatened, pastors seeing churches destroyed, pastors being physically assaulted, all under the guise of these anti-conversion laws.
And one of the worst places right now is Manipur State, where the ethnic Kuki tribe, it's mostly Christian. They're about 16% of the population in Manipur. They've suffered attacks from other tribes in that northeastern state over land rights. They want more authority and land rights there. It's gotten so bad as a result, votes were nullified in 11 polling stations after some armed men burst into the election areas and started smashing voting machines. So tell us about the Kuki ethnic Christians and what's going on in Manipur State.
Yeah, you're right. What originally did start out as more a tribal disputes and tribal opposition to one another for Christians, it has really spread. There are Christians that, as you said, largely represented the Kuki, but there are Christians represented in other tribes as well, and that has really transcended beyond what had started off as just kind of these ethnic tensions, and has now really for Christians have come under fire by all parties. And so we're all familiar with the events of May of last year and how those have just continued to create that unrest and instability throughout the area.
And Ryan, we know that young Indians are being trained up in militant Hindu nationalism. Many groups like the Bajrang Dal attack Christians. So what is your expectation for Christians in the future if the BJP party holds on to the majority in Parliament?
Yeah, it would not be a good picture for Christians in India. We would expect to see that persecution continue to rise. And so this is a very important election. And, if you take a look at some of the populist sentiments, it would seem to suggest that BJP will continue to retain and continue to grow in power and influence there. There There's much speculation that with that increased control and influence, that currently there are 11 states, 11 of the 28 that have anti-conversion laws. A couple of others have passed bills, but haven't necessarily seen those passed into law as of yet. But there is expectation that we could see intensified efforts to see a national anti-conversion law put in place. For Christians, this election is incredibly important, and we as Christians in the West and those that would look to support our brothers and sisters is one that we need to be lifting up in prayer.
Well, Prime Minister Modi is supposed to be representing all Indians, so why doesn't he do more to stop the violence? Does he support these attacks against Christians and Muslims too? I might add, they're also a persecuted minority in India.
They are really anybody outside of that Hindu. That's the desire by many is to see India, which currently is technically a secular state and enjoys religious freedoms for all. There are many that would like to see India officially become a Hindu state. And so, for all religious minorities, Christians and Muslims alike, they can come under fire by those Hindu nationalists that are seeking to gain power and influence.
Well, what can the United States do? I mean, I know India is a key ally to help counter Chinese aggression in the region. So what can the U.S. do, and what can our viewers do, and how can we pray?
Yeah, I think the first and most important thing certainly is prayer. Many of your viewers are likely familiar with that. It has become increasingly difficult for outside organizations outside of India to even get aid into India. Many Christian organizations have been forced to close up shop and forced out of India. And so it's a difficult situation. And so again, first and foremost, we need to be lifting up our brothers and sisters in prayer. We need to be lifting up this election, that it would be a fair election. We need to be praying that leaders that would allow for, again, some of those things that are on the books that would protect religious freedoms, that those would be upheld, that those would be seen as important, and that those would continue to be embraced there in India.
Okay, Ryan Braun, we'll see how the vote turns out. As things stand right now, projections are a resounding victory for the BJP. Thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Pro-Hamas protests at Ivy League schools have led to anti-Semitic threats and demonstrator arrests. New York Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis is urging passage of legislation she has introduced, which would strip federal funding from schools that fail to protect students from anti-Semitism. She also wants to pull the visas of foreign students who participate in anti-Semitic protests. Well, joining us with more is Kenneth Abramowitz. He's chairman of Citizens for National Security and author of the book Multi-Front War: Defending America from Political Islam, China, Russia, Pandemics, and Racial Strife. Kenneth, it's good to have you with us. So what do you think of Congresswoman Malliotakis' proposed legislation? Is this the best way to deal with anti-Semitism on college campuses, or do other steps need to be taken?
Well, it's a good start, which she proposed. You probably have to do about 10 different things to address anti-Semitism on the campuses. Number one, universities are tax-exempt educational organizations. They've clearly become political organizations, and political organizations do not get tax-exempt status. So I would eliminate all tax-exempt status for all universities starting out. Unless they can prove that they can protect Jewish and Christian students.
So why do you think so many young people are joining in these protests, supporting a terror group and Jewish hate? Is this the prelude to World War?
Well, according to my definition, we're in World War III right now. And the difference between World War III and World War I and II is World War I and II were fought over there. Well, World War III is fought over there and here at the same time. We're discussing today is cultural warfare. How do you fight each other, not with bullets and guns, but with words and protests and ideas? And that's what we're witnessing now on these campuses.
Who do you think is funding and organizing these protests, and why?
Well, basically our outside enemies want to destroy us, and they're using our internal enemies as a weapon, not a physical weapon, yet a cultural weapon. So I would say that, by the way, when I see protesters, I divide them immediately into 10% and 90%. 90% I call useful idiots. That's what a term that Lenin used 100 years ago. It's the 10%, the ringleaders, who are real evil. So I would say Qatar's fingers and Iranian fingers are all over the place, because those are Islamist countries who finance Islamist organizations to disrupt Judeo-Christian culture.
How about domestic groups? I mean, you think CARE has anything to do with this?
Well, CARE is Muslim Brotherhood. So CARE would be supported by Qatar. Qatar is the leading supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's also joined in with Turkey. And meanwhile, Iran is also, they're the Shiites, not the Sunnis, but they also support activities like this, because what they're trying to do is put pressure on America to put pressure on Israel to stop trying to defeat Hamas, which is a professional death cult, in Gaza.
So what do these young people need to understand, Kenneth, about Israel on October 7th and the challenges ahead?
Well, they have to understand good versus evil. So Israel, Jews and Christians represent good. My definition of good is, by the way, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 100% of the people. And the forces of evil believe in life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 10% of the people. In other words, the criminal organizations that they represent. So these kids are being manipulated to basically support a criminal organization, which is not in their own self-interest. It is not in America's interest, Israel's interest, not in the interest of Jews or Christians. They're being manipulated by these foreign entities.
So what do we do about it?
Okay, well, the universities, as we just discussed, universities have direct responsibilities to protect their students. And if they don't protect their students, the administration should be fired or sued. The board of directors should be fired or sued. Key donors should stop contributing. The federal government should pull away their tax-exempt status. And also, by the way, the state governments and city governments also provide resources for these universities. So I would say the feds plus the state plus the city should all pull financing from universities that refuse to protect their students.
Okay, Kenneth Abramowitz, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
A pleasure to be with you today.
Bye-bye biological reality. The Biden administration has rewritten Title IX regulations to include gender identity in Department of Education rules prohibiting sex-based discrimination. This means any school that receives federal funds must allow biological males to participate in female sports. Well, here with more is Angela Morabito, former press secretary of the Department of Education and now spokesperson for the Defense of Freedom Institute. Angela, it's good to talk with you again. So first, explain what Title IX is and why rewriting the rules is significant.
Well, it's great to be with you, Gary, and I wish I had better news to share. Title IX has stood for 50 years to prevent discrimination on the basis of sex in educational activities and programs receiving federal funding. And the Biden administration's new rule, it's really not an executive order, it's a rule that's come from the Department of Ed, is redefining sex in the law to include gender identity. So now, instead of treating students at school based on their biological sex, schools are going to be required to treat them based on the gender that they feel that they are. This creates a huge problem, particularly when it comes to sports, because the Biden administration has just decided that allowing men and women's sports is no longer a Title IX violation. Same with restrooms and locker rooms. And it creates a huge problem for everyone. It's a massive step back for due process and for the rights of women in schools.
Well, as you mentioned, we know this will have a chilling effect on women's sports. So why aren't more feminists and progressives speaking out about this? Because isn't this a violation of the rights of the majority, women and girls? It discriminates against them as they try to protect others.
Absolutely. And that is the million-dollar question. Anyone who says that they believe in women's rights should be upset by this new rule, and they should be standing up against it. And the Biden administration has been very careful to say, oh, no, we're not devastating women's sports. But they absolutely are. They've just decided they're not going to enforce Title IX the way it was written. And the states now can allow men and women's sports, locker rooms, restrooms, dorms, wherever. And the Biden administration will simply sit on its hands and do nothing about it. They also have a separate rule that is specifically about athletics that is coming expected later in the year, although no one is exactly certain. And that rule is expected to force schools to allow men and women's sports. So it's a very sad day for women in schools, especially female athletes. And the Biden administration is just intent on making things worse.
And it isn't only a sports competition. Rules like these have already been imposed on Christian colleges. Similar rules at HUD were imposed on College of the Ozarks. I'm sure you remember that one, requiring them to allow males and females to share shower and bathroom facilities. So what's the likelihood that Title IX, this rule change, will force co-ed showers and bathrooms everywhere, public schools, or at least require biological male transgenders to use female locker rooms everywhere?
It is tremendously frightening. And, while Title IX does certainly cover colleges, it also applies from kindergarten, even pre-K, all the way up through the education system. And one of the things it does that people need to be aware of is it forces schools to treat students based on their gender identity. And that includes the name and pronouns that they want to use. So if someone is repeatedly, quote unquote, misgendered or dead named, or a teacher decides, no, I'm going to call a he and a she is she, and I'm not going to play into what that child happens to believe about themselves that day, that teacher could be found to be creating a hostile environment. That's a problem. The teacher should not have their speech compelled or controlled by the government. They shouldn't be forced to play into what a child believes about themselves rather than uphold the truth. Now, here's the kicker. The Biden administration thinks misgendering can create a hostile environment, but a man in a woman's locker room cannot. It is just plain ridiculous. And I think the American public see that. They don't want this rule.
So Angela, what's being done to try to reverse this executive action? I guess it isn't an executive action. It just is Biden administration policy of the Department of Education.
It is. So the rule is slated to take effect in August, and there are quite a few things that could happen both before and after then. While I can't speak to exactly what will happen in the immediate aftermath, I know that Congress has a chance to take a stand here and say no. There's always the Congressional Review Act is an option. There is also the potential for a new administration to come in and just yank the rule and say this is absolutely wrong. It is an inversion of the law that robs the civil rights law of its initial meaning and replaces it with radical politics. So an upcoming administration has the chance to make a change as well.
Well, I mean, you get a new administration and then they take it and make it one way, and then a new one comes in after that, changes it like we've seen. How do we get around that?
Well, I think it's important to note that there was, prior to this Biden administration rule, a 2020 rule from former Secretary Betsy DeVos that was working. It had great due process protections in place that was protecting all students. There was no need for the Biden administration to go in and create a new rule that overwrote one that was working really, really well. So this isn't a matter of reinventing the wheel. It should be a matter of going back to the 2020 DeVos rule that was working, that was upholding students' civil rights.
Okay, I'm sure there will be lawsuits as well. Angela Morabito of the Defense of Freedom Institute. Thank you, Angela, for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary.